The autumn sun hung low over Doña Ana County when Elena Garcia spotted something that made her heart clench. She knew every creosote bush and cottonwood tree on her street, but the silhouette perched high on the electrical pole at the corner was new and terribly wrong. Squinting against the glare, she saw it. A bobcat. It was trapped 40 feet above the ground, frozen in terror on a narrow crossbar. Worse, it was wedged between live electrical conductors humming with 7,200 volts, enough to kill it in an instant. As neighbors gathered, the situation became devastatingly clear. The animal's tufted ears were pressed flat in fear, and based on local reports, it had likely been stranded there for 2 days. It was a slow torture of fear, exhaustion, and dehydration. A frantic series of calls began, to the county, the electric company, and the Department of Game and Fish. But how do you rescue a terrified predator from a high-voltage death trap when one wrong move means a fatal shock? The autumn sun hung low over Doña Ana County, casting long shadows across Topaz Road, when Elena Garcia first spotted something that made her heart clench. She had lived in this quiet corner of New Mexico for 32 years, raised 3 children in the adobe-style house with the blue trim, and knew every cottonwood tree and creosote bush along her street. But the silhouette perched high on the electrical pole at the corner, that was new and terribly wrong. Elena squinted against the glare, her hand rising to shield her eyes. The shape was too large for a hawk, too compact for a turkey vulture. As the creature shifted, autumn light caught golden-brown fur marked with distinctive dark spots and bars. A bobcat, and it was trapped among the power lines, crouched on the crossbar between live electrical conductors that hummed with enough voltage to kill. "Dios mío," Elena whispered, her pulse quickening. She had seen bobcats before, of course. Glimpses of tawny shadows slipping through the arroyos at dusk, paw prints in the dust near her chicken coop. But never like this. Never frozen in terror 40 feet above the ground, surrounded by death on every side. Elena hurried back inside and grabbed her phone, her fingers trembling slightly as she dialed Ruth Chavez, who lived 3 houses down. Ruth answered on the second ring, her warm voice immediately turning concerned as Elena explained what she had found. "I'll be right there," Ruth said, "and I'm calling Jorge." Within 15 minutes, a small cluster of neighbors had gathered on Topaz Road, keeping a respectful distance from the pole. Jorge Molina arrived with binoculars, and through the lenses, the situation became devastatingly clear. The bobcat was a young adult, probably 2 or 3 years old, with tufted ears pressed flat against its skull in fear. Its pupils were dilated to black pools, and every muscle in its compact body was rigid with tension. "How long has it been up there?" Jorge asked quietly, lowering the binoculars. "I don't know," Elena admitted. "I only just noticed it, but—" She paused, thinking. "Yesterday evening I heard some commotion, yowling like fighting cats. I thought it was strays, and the Hendersons' dogs have been going crazy for 2 days barking at something." Ruth pressed her lips together. 2 days. That poor creature has been up there for 2 days. The knowledge settled over them like a weight. 2 days without water in the dry New Mexico heat. 2 days balanced on a narrow beam, afraid to move, surrounded by wires carrying 7,200 volts, enough electricity to stop a heart in an instant. Bobcats were resilient, adapted to harsh desert conditions. But this was different. This was a slow torture of fear, dehydration, and exhaustion. Elena pulled out her phone again. "I'm calling the county and the electric company. Everyone I can think of." The calls began. Elena reached the Doña Ana County offices and was transferred 3 times before connecting with someone in emergency services. She described the situation, trying to keep her voice steady, explaining that a wild animal was trapped on live electrical equipment and had been there for at least 2 days. The person on the other end promised to escalate the issue and get back to her. Jorge called El Paso Electric Company, navigating through automated menus until he reached a dispatcher who took down the pole number and location. "We'll send someone to assess," the dispatcher said. But there was no urgency in the voice, no recognition of the crisis unfolding. Ruth contacted the New Mexico Department of Game and Fish, and here, finally, they found someone who understood. The officer on duty asked detailed questions. How high was the Bobcat? Was it showing signs of injury? Could it climb down on its own? Ruth looked up at the pole, at the terrified animal frozen in place. "No," she said softly. "It's too scared to move. And even if it tried, it could touch the wires. It needs help." "We'll send someone," the officer assured her. "But we'll need the power shut off before we can do anything. This is going to require coordination." As the afternoon wore on, more neighbors emerged from their homes. Word spread through the small community with the speed of concern. Lydia Perez, a grandmother who had lived on Topaz Road since before the street was paved, brought a folding chair and settled in to keep watch. Her grandson Mateo, home from high school with chalk dust still on his fingers from art class, stood beside her, his young face etched with worry. "Can't we throw it some food?" Mateo asked. "Or water?" Jorge shook his head gently. "We can't get close enough without risking our own safety. And if we startle it, it might move and touch the wires." The boy's jaw tightened. "So we just watch it suffer?" "We watch," Lydia said, placing a weathered hand on her grandson's arm. "We witness. And we make sure help comes." By late afternoon, "I've been briefed on the situation. I want you to know we're treating this as an ongoing public safety concern, both for the animal and for residents. We're coordinating with Game and Fish and El Paso Electric. This is going to require a multi-agency response, but we're committed to resolving it safely." Elena felt tears prick her eyes. "Thank you," she managed. "That animal has been suffering up there. We couldn't just leave it." "No," Messias agreed. "We couldn't." The machinery of rescue began to move. County staff made calls. El Paso Electric dispatched engineers to assess the situation and determine what would be required to safely de-energize the lines. Game and Fish coordinated equipment and personnel. What might have taken days of bureaucratic back and forth was compressed into hours because people chose to act with urgency. At 4:30 p.m., Elena's phone rang again. It was a representative from El Paso Electric Company with news. "We've reviewed the situation and we're prepared to de-energize the immediate area after 5 p.m. today," the representative explained. "This will create a temporary power outage affecting approximately 42 customers in your neighborhood, but it's necessary to ensure everyone's safety during the rescue operation." "How long will the power be out?" Elena asked. "We estimate less than an hour. Power should be restored by 5:45 p.m., but the rescue window will be brief. We'll need everyone to work quickly once the lines are dead." Elena agreed immediately and called Ruth and Jorge with the update. The 3 of them then helped county staff spread the word. The Doña Ana County MVRDA 911 Center pushed alerts through social media and emergency notification channels. Elena's phone pinged with the official message, and she saw neighbors checking their own devices, nodding and understanding. By 4:45 p.m., Topaz Road had transformed into a state area. A bucket truck from the county's Facilities and Parks Department rumbled to a stop near the pole. Its massive boom folded down like a sleeping crane. Two men emerged, Andy Segovia and Victor Uranga, both experienced operators who had worked on countless county projects but never anything quite like this. Behind them, a white pickup with the Game and Fish logo pulled up, and Sergeant Chris Ortega stepped out carrying a specialized rescue pole with a snare loop at the end. The small crowd of neighbors had grown. People stood in clusters on lawns and driveways, speaking in hushed voices, all eyes turning upward to the Bobcat that had become their collective responsibility. The animal remained motionless, conserving energy, but its sides heaved with rapid breathing. Dehydration was setting in. Time was running short. Ortega approached Elena, Ruth, and Jorge, introducing himself with a quiet professionalism that inspired confidence. He had responded to hundreds of wildlife calls in his career. Bears in dumpsters, mountain lions near schools, elk tangled in fences. But this, he admitted, was unique. The challenge, he explained, is that bobcats are incredibly strong and agile when panicked. Once I get the snare around it, there's going to be a struggle. It's going to fight. The last thing we want is for it to break free and fall or make contact with the wires before we have it secure. What are its chances? Ruth asked, the question everyone was thinking. Ortega looked up at the pole, measuring distances and angles with experienced eyes. If we work quickly and everything goes according to plan, good. The animal is stressed and dehydrated, but bobcats are tough. Once we get it down safely, we'll do a quick health assessment and then transport it to a release site far from human development. At 5 p.m., the El Paso electric crew made the final checks. A supervisor confirmed that all downstream circuits were isolated and the equipment was ready. He raised his radio and gave the command. The hum that had been a constant background presence along Topaz Road for decades, that invisible vibration of electricity flowing through copper and aluminum, fell silent. Up and down the street, porch lights winked out, air conditioning units stopped their endless cycling, and refrigerators ceased their mechanical humming. 42 homes went dark, but every single resident understood why, and not one complained. Andy Segovia climbed into the bucket of the truck, and Victor Uranga took position at the controls. Ortega secured his equipment and stepped into the bucket beside Andy, the rescue pole held carefully. The boom began its slow, groaning ascent, extending upward with hydraulic precision. 40 feet. The bucket swayed slightly in the evening breeze. Elena gripped the chain-link fence at the edge of the property, her knuckles white. Ruth stood beside her, one hand pressed to her chest. Jorge had his arm around Lydia's shoulders while Mateo stood rigid, barely breathing. All along the street, people watched in tense silence. As the bucket approached, the bobcat finally moved. Its head swiveled, ears pricked forward, and a low growl rumbled from its throat, a sound of pure primal fear. It shifted on the crossbar, muscles bunching. Easy, Ortega murmured, though the animal couldn't understand the words. Easy now. He extended the rescue pole slowly, the loop at the end opening like a gentle hand. The bobcat tracked the movement, eyes locked on this new threat. Its body coiled tighter. Ortega knew that timing would be everything. Too fast and the animal would bolt. Too slow and exhaustion might cause it to slip. The loop drifted closer. 6 feet. 4 feet. 2 feet. The bobcat hissed, a sharp, explosive sound that made several watchers flinch. Its haunches tensed. Ortega held steady, his own breathing measured and calm, waiting for the exact right moment. Then, with practiced precision, he moved. The loop dropped over the bobcat's head and shoulders, and in the same fluid motion, he drew the snare closed. The animal erupted in fury, twisting, clawing, yowling with a voice that seemed too large for its body. The bucket rocked. Andy braced himself. Ortega maintained his grip, absorbing the violent struggle, never loosening his hold. For several heartbeats that felt like hours, the bobcat fought with everything it had left. Its powerful hind legs kicked at empty air. Its front paws, each equipped with razor-sharp retractable claws, swiped at the pole. Saliva flew from its open mouth, revealing white teeth designed for killing. This was an apex predator, built for survival, and it was fighting for its life. But Ortega had done this before, and his hands remained steady. Gradually, carefully, he drew the bobcat closer to the bucket, away from the deadly wires, pulling it into a space where it could be safely secured. Andy had a large animal transport crate ready, its door open and waiting. "Almost there," Andy said quietly. "Almost got it." With one final coordinated effort, they guided the struggling bobcat into the crate. The door swung shut with a decisive click. The lock engaged. The animal was safe. For a moment, no one moved. Then, like a wave breaking, sound returned to Topaz Road. Gasps of relief. A laugh that broke into tears from someone in the crowd. Spontaneous chorus of cheers erupted from 30-some neighbors who had waited with held breath. Victor Aranga carefully lowered the boom, bringing the bucket, the two men, and the crated bobcat back to solid ground. As soon as the bucket touched down, people surged forward, not too close, but near enough to see, to witness the completion of this small miracle. Elena found herself crying, tears streaming down her weathered cheeks. Ruth had both hands pressed to her mouth, her eyes bright. Jorge was grinning, a rare, full smile that transformed his usually serious face. Mateo Perez reached out and pressed his chalky thumbprint against the side of the county truck, a signature of witness, a mark of promise. Lydia appeared with a basket of still warm flour tortillas wrapped in a clean towel, offering them to Andy, Victor, and Ortega. "You must eat something," she insisted in the tone that grandmothers everywhere use, the one that brooks no argument. "You did good work. You need strength." Ortega accepted a tortilla with genuine gratitude, but his focus remained on the crate. He knelt beside it, peering through the ventilation holes. Inside, the bobcat had pressed itself into the far corner, panting heavily, eyes still wide with fear and confusion. But it was alive. It was safe. "The operation went well," Ortega said, looking up at the crowd of concerned faces, especially considering how quickly it came together. His voice carried a weight of humility. "I'm humbled by how many people were willing to assist. The public's interest shows how deeply we protect wildlife in this state." A representative from El Paso Electric approached Fernando Macias, who had arrived during the rescue. "We can restore power now." Macias nodded, then turned to address the gathered neighbors. "I want to thank all of you," he said simply. "This wasn't just a county operation or a game and fish operation. This was a community coming together to protect a life. That matters." At 5:45 p.m., the power returned. Lights flickered on in windows up and down Topaz Road. Air conditioning units hummed back to life. The familiar electrical pulse resumed its invisible work. But something had changed in that hour of darkness. Something had been illuminated that had nothing to do with electricity. Ortega loaded the crated Bobcat into his truck while Andy and Victor secured their equipment. Elena, Ruth, Jorge, and many of their neighbors remained outside, reluctant to go back inside, wanting to see this through to its conclusion. "Where will you take it?" Elena asked Ortega. "Lake Valley area near Hillsborough," he replied. "It's in the Gila National Forest, rugged terrain, plenty of cover, good populations of rabbits and rodents. Perfect bobcat habitat, and far enough from human development that it should stay out of trouble." He paused, glancing at the crate. "We'll give it a quick health check first, some water, and let it rest for a bit. Then, before dawn tomorrow, we'll make the release. Will it be okay?" This from Mateo, who had moved closer. "After everything it's been through?" Ortega met the young man's eyes with respect. "Bobcats are remarkably resilient. This one is young and, aside from dehydration and stress, appears uninjured. In the wild, it would have faced many dangerous situations. Fights with other predators, scarce food during droughts, harsh weather. This was traumatic, yes, but it's a survivor. They all are." As Ortega prepared to leave, neighbors began to disperse, but slowly, stopping to talk to one another, to shake hands, to share the strange bond that had formed over a trapped wild animal. Elena found herself standing with Ruth and Jorge as the sun finally slipped below the western horizon, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose. "I keep thinking," Ruth said softly, "about all the things that had to happen for this to work. You noticing the bobcat, us calling the right people, the county taking it seriously, the electric company agreeing to cut power, game and fish having someone available, all those pieces falling into place. And the neighbors," Jorge added. 42 homes without power, and not one person complained. Everyone understood." Elena nodded, watching the taillights of Ortega's truck disappear down the road. "We forget sometimes," she said, "that we're all connected. Not just on social media or through phone lines, but really connected. We share this place, the land, the desert, the animals. When something needs doing, when something's in trouble, we can choose to act or look away." "Today we acted," Ruth finished. Before dawn the next morning, as stars still blazed in the vast New Mexico sky, Sergeant Chris Ortega made the drive to Lake Valley. The area was remote, accessible only by rough roads that wound through hills studded with juniper and piñon pine. Gila National Forest stretched for miles in every direction. 3 million acres of wilderness where a bobcat could live its entire life without seeing another human being. Ortega found a suitable spot, a rocky outcropping near a seasonal creek bed, with dense brush cover and plenty of game trails visible in the dust. He positioned the crate, checked one more time that the bobcat was alert and responsive, then opened the door. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then, like a ghost materializing from shadow, the bobcat emerged. It paused at the threshold, nose twitching, testing the air. Its ears swiveled, catching the sounds of the waking forest, the call of a canyon wren, the rustle of a lizard in dry leaves, the distant murmur of wind through pine needles. The bobcat looked back once, golden eyes meeting Ortega's for a brief, eternal second. Then it turned and flowed into the brush, its spotted coat blending perfectly with the dappled shadows. Within heartbeats, it had vanished completely, reclaimed by the wild. Ortega stood there for a few minutes more, listening to the silence that wasn't silent at all, just filled with sounds that belonged to this place, this ecosystem, this web of life that humans were part of, whether they acknowledged it or not. When he returned to Doña Ana County and filed his report, he included a note that he hoped would be shared with the community. The Bobcat was successfully released and showed strong, healthy behavior. It should do well in its new territory. Thank you to all who helped make this rescue possible. Elena received the message 3 days later, forwarded through the county's community liaison. She shared it with Ruth, who shared it with Jorge, who mentioned it at the local feed store. Lydia told her bridge club. Mateo wrote about it in an essay for his English class titled, "The Day We Saved a Life." The electrical pole on Topaz Road stood unchanged, its wires humming their endless song. But sometimes, in the evening, Elena would step onto her porch and look up at that crossbar where a terrified animal had clung for 2 desperate days. She thought about fear and compassion, about communities and connections, about the way a single life, even a wild one that most people would never see, could matter enough to bring dozens of strangers together. She thought about alerts sent and wires silenced and hands held steady. She thought about the darkness that had fallen over 42 homes so that light could be restored to one small wildlife. She thought about a bucket truck rising and a loop descending and the click of a great door closing on salvation. Most of all, she thought about the way the Bobcat had looked back before vanishing into the forest. That single glance that seemed to hold acknowledgement, or perhaps just reflection. A moment when human and wild met on equal ground, separated by everything that made them different, united by the simple fact that they both belonged to this desert, this earth, this improbable and precious world. And every time she thought about it, Elena felt something warm unfold in her chest. A feeling that had no name but that she recognized as hope. Hope that despite all the brokenness and division, despite all the ways people failed each other and the world around them, there were still moments like this. Moments when compassion won. Moments when a whole town could unite to save a single terrified creature, because it was the right thing to do. No speeches were needed, no grand gestures or proclamations. Just people caring, acting, working together. Just names becoming actions and actions becoming care. Just one small life and a community that refused to look away. The Bobcat, somewhere in the wild vastness of Gila National Forest, moved through the shadows with the grace of wind through grass. It drank from clear streams and hunted in the cooling dusk, and claimed a territory among the rocks and pines. It survived, as bobcats always have, as bobcats always will. And on Topaz Road, life returned to normal. The street hummed with its usual rhythm. But something had changed, something subtle and profound. The people who lived there carried a story now, a shared memory of the day they had been part of something larger than themselves. They had witnessed suffering and refused to accept it. They had seen a problem and mobilized to solve it. They had given up convenience, a mere hour of electricity, to restore freedom to a wild soul. In a world that often felt too complex, too divided, too overwhelming, they had done one simple, beautiful thing. They had saved a life. And in doing so, they had saved something else too, something harder to name but no less real. They had saved the part of themselves that still believed in goodness, still trusted in community, still knew that every life, no matter how small, how wild, how different, held value beyond measure. The Bobcat was free. The people of Topaz Road were freed too. Freed from the weight of apathy, freed by the lightness of compassion, freed into the knowledge that when the world called for help, they had answered. And that, in the end, was the truest rescue of all.